All right, so Lindsay from Freedom Media, WA, and we have the team here. We'll just turn down, is it the laptop? So I apologise for the rudimentary setup. We have spoken about preparing the studio. In the backdrop here, this is one of the areas here. Is that the... Yeah? So... we've come up and we're setting up this stream today because so with me I have Dr. Yunous Vagh, and we met the other day down at the Malaga pre-poll.
That's right, yeah.
And I've established that you are an independent running for a Senate position here in Western Australia, and we had a particularly good discussion, and I felt it's quite important that people get to know who you are. So I guess by way of introduction, just to say a little bit about yourself, and then we've got some questions.
Okay, good. Well, my name is Dr. Yunous Vagh. I've been living in Australia for 38 years now. I came here as a young man, as a qualified cartographer, but since then I've expanded my education, and now I hold a doctorate in computing science. I've also had some experience or some education in medical science. When I was 20 years old, I did 2 years of medical studies. I've also did a lot of research into medical studies. So I feel that with that education and that research ability, these abilities have actually prepared me for my first foray into politics.
So now I'm just saying that we do have, it's a jury rig that we have here at the moment, so please apologise for that. We're trying to check audio and make sure we have all that. A few of the comments have come through. I will look down from time to time, and I can see Tanya straight away has said that she's researched yourself, and you have her vote. So thank you, Tanya, for tuning in.
Yes.
And I guess one of the important things that I wanted to say that resonated with me, there's two things firstly before we move on, that we have your lovely wife in the background here, who's come up, who I also met the other day as well, and also your youngest son. We've covered a number of freedom rallies here in Perth, of which you yourself have been to many of these freedom rallies.
I've attended actually three of them, yes.
So now I thought it's particularly important to perhaps have this conversation because you are running for a Senate position here in Western Australia as a true independent. And there is a lot of information, I guess, in Australia's landscape. This election, probably more than ever, certainly in my lifetime, the average person has become more politically aware of, but there's still a long way to go in terms of information. And from your point, one of the things, I guess, is to give people an opportunity to understand more about yourself. But there's discussions around talking above the line, voting above the line, 6 boxes in the Senate, or voting below the line. And the independents, like yourself, Doctor, are at a distinct disadvantage if people vote above the line.
Absolutely.
And one of the reasons for that?
One of the reasons for that is they won't see me. They won't see me, and they won't actually see any of the candidate names. They will just see, if you vote above the party line, you will only see the parties. You won't even see the candidates that the parties are hosting. So it's important that if you want to change the landscape, political landscape of Australia, you should vote for the independents and vote below the line. And it's also important to get to know your independents, which is what we're doing here today.
Absolutely. And you have been spending, or about to certainly this week, spend some time at some of the pre-poll booths. That's another conversation in itself that I've certainly found this week to be quite eye-opening, to have 4 pre-polling booths north of the river, or for this particularly where you live. For the division, thank you. Places a tremendous amount of strain on the independents. I mean, you can't be in 4 places at once on your own. You need help and support, for that. I guess we've had a lot of talk coming through about, those within the freedom movement to reach out and help. Do you need help?
Absolutely, I need lots of help. I've actually tried to get my pamphlets underway and my posters, but I expect them to be completed on Monday or Tuesday at the latest. But I have no way of actually getting them out in so many of these polling places. So I've actually reduced the number of produced or on order because of the fact that I don't have any volunteers or helpers, and my resources are grossly limited compared to the big parties and those that are funded. So I'm funding myself, basically.
That and we've certainly seen with the big parties. I've had a number of discussions with those at the polling booths, and you find Liberal and Labor are looking at 4-person teams minimum, funded staff. They're able to give out pre-election material, and then you have even those from I guess One Nation, from UAP, Australian Federation Party, those type of political parties that you wouldn't call them so much independent, but they are still struggling for resources. But in this instance, Senate position, it really is a struggle, in terms of that. What I'd like to do, I see that you have your brochure here.
Yes, I have.
We'll try and get this up as best we can on the screen. We are seeing some of the comments coming through. Missy, thank you for that, talking about voting below the line. And it's simply, if we may just turn that around and just, we'll try and get Karen just to zoom in a little bit on this. So we're just waiting for, we have a monitor in front of us, and there is a little bit of latency behind here, a little bit of glare. We apologise for that. But as you can see, as Karen zooms in on that there, if you're looking for the Senate positions of voting above the line, you simply will not see labelled ungrouped.
Yes.
So the likes of Dr. Vaughan, who are listed as ungrouped, and the reason why you need to vote below the line is so that you can actually see who the candidate is. The main objective, I guess, is vote number one.
Absolutely. Vote number one if you believe in what I believe, and you believe that I can advocate for you in the government if I get a Senate position.
Now, Doctor, I'd like to ask you your position in terms of seeing the majors back in, or what would you?
Well, I've lived, as I said, I've lived in Australia for 38 years. I voted variously with different parties, and I have become, over the last few years, let's say the last decade or so, I've become disillusioned with the main parties, because for me it is like flipping a coin. On one side you got Labor, and the other side you got Liberal, and this, we understand this to be bipartisan politics, and it is, in my opinion, it is not real democracy. Because as we've seen in WA, if you give one party too much power, they have license to do anything. And there is no opposition, there are no checks and balances in the political system. So this is why it's important to move away from this bipartisan example of democracy.
And I guess it's probably the most important election post World War II, I should say, and hence we're finding a lot of people getting some buy-in there. So comment just coming through. Yes, this is part of the new studio. This will be the podcast backdrop, and we're bringing you this stream because I felt with the discussion that I had the other day down at the Malaga pre-poll booth with Dr. Vaughan, I felt that it's really important that he be given an opportunity to get his message out. And there's certainly there's a lot that in terms of his understanding of what's going on in the freedom movement. And we're talking about with the Senate, and then we also had the lower house. You've chosen the Senate. And because advocating for people in your division, in your electorate, what are some of the things that you're looking to achieve?
Well, there's quite a few things. Where do I start? I've looked at the banking systems. I've looked at the land rights situation. I've looked at the Bill of Rights I've actually got very well educated over the last 2 years because of the pandemic and the virus and the vaccinations. I found out that we don't have much rights under the present constitution, and that we should actually install something which is more in the form of a Bill of Rights, so that our freedoms are not eroded. Because as we know that governments will install state of emergencies and slowly erode our freedoms. And if we don't complain or be outraged by the loss of our freedoms, we would have more state of emergencies. In fact, in WA we find that the state of emergency has been increased or extended to January 2023. In other countries, the state of emergency, as organized by their constitutions, only allows them to extend the state of emergency, Lindsay, for 2 weeks at a time. And here we find that the state of emergency, if I'm not mistaken, is now gone to January 2023, and we're still only in May.
And I think you're talking about a West Australian issue, and you're looking for West Australian Senate representation. Yes. So although this is a federal election, you're highlighting too much power, is the first point that I would make there. And as you say, yes, Premier Mark McGowan has, without even the expiry of the current public health order or state of emergency in July 2022, he's already pushed through what I would call, and I've used this term many times, under the dark of night, push through motions to sneak it through the back door, unopposed, pushing it out to January, as you've mentioned, January 2023. And I guess at a time when a lot of the mandates have been removed, all bar a couple. I guess, we can have, we've just seen recently Anzac Day, for example, that it's okay the preceding week for 40,000 people to go to the football, but you can't have people up at the State War Memorial. Either way, whatever your
I think it was just 500 or something that was allowed.
500 by VIP invitation only at that particular there. And you've mentioned, you've mentioned the state of democracy, and talking about, I just want to refer to, and I have sort of touched on this at a couple of different streams, if I may, because I think it is important in this discussion. So we're talking about, and you may or may not be aware, so there is an annual report that is produced. In this case, it's the Economist Intelligence Unit Annual Democracy Index 2021 that was published. In that report, in August last year, it established that Australia was number 9 out of 21 countries worldwide that were classified as full democracies. Number 9 out of 21.
That is outrageous.
So therefore, I guess I'm just looking at some figures here. 12.9%, that's only 12.9% of the world's countries can call themselves a full democracy, meaning that only 6.4% of the world's population live in a full democracy. And the comment that I've said before, people really need to understand the dire straits of the Australian democracy that we find ourselves in at the moment. We tend to be 5 to 9 years behind US trends. The United States of America have not made that full democracy index since 2016.
And I'm not surprised at all.
So that the people that may be watching now, the people that also may be viewing this stream down the track, I guess, again, coming back to yourself, advocating, in what ways are you, just tell, why would people vote for an independent?
Well, I don't have a boss. The only boss I have are you, the electors, and my conscience, and of course to God. If you're voting for me, I'm going to represent you in the Senate. So in other words, if there are any policies or bills that are coming through the Senate and it is not in the interests of the people and in the interests of our communities, they will be opposed. And also if I find situations where, for example, we have the thing called the proof of concept in the banking system, I will oppose that. And if there is a situation where the WHO is going to take over our constitution, which I believe they might have already done, but if they haven't, I will oppose that as well. So anything, I will provide solid opposition with no party trying to convince me or lobby to me to change my decision and my conscience. So I will be voting always with a complete conscience and representing you, the electors, and the people of Australia.
So I guess, Doctor, you're touching on the concept that most people would understand as digital identity. And there is a lot of speculation at the moment talking about the WHO Australia has entered into a treaty that gives the pandemic treaty, the pandemic response. Can you share from your knowledge and understanding a little bit?
From my understanding, the pandemic response treaty means that there will be another pandemic, and in the face of the next pandemic, which actually McGowan has talked about or hinted that there will be a next pandemic. Very recently he talked about that, but the reporter unfortunately did not ask him what is the next pandemic and when is it going to come. So the pandemic response with the WHO is basically if we have a next when we have the next pandemic, the WHO will override your constitution and they will dictate what are the protocols, what are the health protocols. Already we have seen in the last year that Mark McGowan has actually instituted an amendment to the Public Health Act, and that Public Health Act names the vaccines as poisons. Am I right, Lindsay?
I mean, I'm trying to come to terms with that. I really am, and I just it's incomprehensible when you start to consider this. And the pandemic treaty also gives United Nations the ability to put foreign troops on Australian soils and implement a response not by the Australian government, but by what the World Health Organization
and the United Nations, yes.
And
this is happening already in many countries. Like I come originally from South Africa, and we find that a lot of people are complaining that there are more UN vehicles now in South Africa and invariably in other countries as well. So they're preparing for something, and that something is the next pandemic. And the next pandemic will be controlled totally by the World Health Organization and the UN. And so all of our rights will be dissolved completely. And there will be no freedom, basically. So, of course, we need to fight for our freedoms. Because if we don't fight for our freedoms now, today, we're living and breathing. What about our children and our grandchildren? Are we leaving our children and grandchildren to a dystopia?
Well, sadly, I'd say unless people take more of a stance, then we are. And I guess, in my opinion, by keeping the majors in and keeping the duopoly going, we are. It's certainly, as you've mentioned about the Bill of Rights, we're probably, one of the few. Off the top of my head, I don't know that information. So if you're certainly at home, put the comment below to see that we find that we don't have that Bill of Rights. We're a Western culture, a Western society that talks about freedoms and what people can do, and how they enjoy and live their life, yet we don't have, the last challenge I think dates back to 1977, where the Constitution found that we have only in the absence of a Bill of Rights, we have the right to assemble freely and exercise political speech, political communication.
But we've seen the extent of that in the last 2.5 years. There's very little of that. The minute you try to protest or exercise your freedom of speech, you lock down. The minute you try to put anything on Facebook, you censored. And you branded as a conspiracy theorist or somebody who's propagating misinformation. But I can guarantee you that myself, as an expert in research, both quantitative and qualitative, and I've got a few publications out there that were as a result of my PhD thesis, that we are experts in research. We know how to take research to bits. We know the difference between systematic errors and symptomatic errors. So even when people speak, we know whether they are lying. So this is why my motto in this campaign is that we will hurl truth at falsehood and its brains will spill out. And this is actually a verse of the Quran.
And I think that's part of our conversation the other day, and that's what struck a chord is your research. And I mean, this feels very foreign sitting here. We're in a studio, if you like, doing a live stream, trying to get your message out there, and hopefully people will get some insight with what time is left and hopefully those, I think they're saying about 2.2 million people have voted either a combination of how to vote or postal votes or pre-poll, which is about 15% of the population. So this, if this week is 10% bigger than last week, there's a lot of people that would be turning up to the polls on Saturday, this coming Saturday.
Yes, I think I expect about 60 to 75% will be, just an estimate, that will be voting only on election day. But of course we know that the pre-polls are open and have been open from Monday.
So it's not too late.
It's not too late
to change that. And I guess those that may have joined the stream, just watching numbers come in and out, and I'm just trying to pick up some comments as well. What I will say at this point, Dr. Vaughan can see your comments there. If you have a particular comment that you would like to put a question,
please do. Yes, if you have a question you want to pose directly to me, put it up on the comments and I'll attempt to answer it.
And it's your research that I saw that you mentioned just now, and the conversations we had the other day, again, that I just came back and I thought, you know what, I mean, here is a man that really is truly independent and truly fighting, for many people's freedoms. And what chose you to do what you're doing now? What chose you to nominate yourself as an independent for the Senate?
Well, I can tell you, Lindsay, it was a difficult decision. I'm not a politician. In fact, I describe myself as a reluctant politician because, politicians have got this, I don't know if I could use this word, but a stigma of not telling the truth. And for me, I am basically a truth teller. So for me to enter into politics is like is a paradox. It's an oxymoron. So how do I reconcile this? And eventually I said to myself, after a long deliberation and after long types of searching, soul searching, I decided I have to do it for the future. And I'm not going to vote for anybody. Even if I have to pay lots of money, I'll be voting for myself. And I'll be introducing people to my way of seeing things. So we need to lift the veil of people's eyes and wake them up and say, this is the reality. Not when you switch on your TV and get brainwashed 24/7 and you're bombarded with a mainstream narrative. We have to have a narrative that suits you. You, the people, need to know what is going on really, not what they want you to believe.
And I guess coming back to your research and things, a man who can analyse data, and that's where you can see that the narrative is not matching the data.
Exactly, Lindsay. When I looked at Pfizer's data and I said, if they could give me that data, I could strip it down and actually tell you exactly what's going on. There's a difference between relative efficacy and absolute efficacy. So if you're talking about relative efficacy, the numbers will be quite high. But if you're talking about, because it's relative to what they're comparing it to. But if you talk about absolute efficacy, the original absolute efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine was only 4%. So when we start to look at all these statistics, then we see that what we are presented with the truth is not actually the truth.
And I think Mark McGowan even said that himself at a press conference about 5-6 weeks ago, and I would take that as a fraudulent slip. I don't believe he meant to say that, but it's probably the closest he's been to correct data.
Yeah.
Of course, we had the now outgoing Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt, who stood out at the very beginning and said that this vaccine is not like the influenza, where it's a yearly basis. They expect that the efficacy will be at least 2 to 3 years behind that, and you would only need one vaccination for COVID
to give you immunity for life.
Yeah, and here we are. We now find ourselves that I think the latest data that off the top of my head I can't quote the numbers, but it's something in Israel. They're saying even with the fourth or the second booster, because it's not 4 vaccinations, because that's, my goodness, that is quite confronting to understand that your second booster is actually
the fourth shot.
The fourth shot. That the efficacy essentially is around 2 to 4 weeks is what they're saying, the protection for full immunity against COVID.
And if you talk about all-cause mortality relating to the vaccines, that's actually going either 0 or negative, which is a different story altogether. But you see, the thing with statistics is how you present it. And there's a saying that lies, damned lies, and statistics. So this is how we can actually, or people who want to propagate lies and deception can manipulate the figures in the data.
So I guess it overlaps in what we're talking about. This isn't a stream to talk purely about COVID, but it certainly is part of the attack on democracy and the misinformation and, to some degree, disinformation by mainstream media, and also those in mainstream politics that we're finding here, and it's something that you've seen right through. Again, the Bill of Rights, in coming back to this, you mentioned originally you came from South Africa.
Yes.
You still have contact back there?
Yes, I do. I have. In fact, we have lots of WhatsApp groups with a lot of professionals in South Africa, and even when ivermectin was banned in South Africa by the APRA, SAPRA, which is an equivalent of APRA in Australia, a group of doctors banded together, led by someone called Dr. Nasiba Katrada, and there were 500 doctors together, and they managed to overturn that decision to ban ivermectin. So, because a lot of people were dying in hospitals, getting hospitalized and dying over the previous 2 years, 2020 and 2021. But we found that a lot of the people were actually placed on high pressure ventilators and given remdesivir. And we found out recently that remdesivir is the one that will kill someone within 3 to 5 days.
Wow. And I think it's important just to disclose that your PhD is not a medical doctor, but it's in computer science?
It's in computer science, yes.
But you did study medicine?
I did study medicine when I was 20 years old. I was planning to become a medical doctor. That was my wish. Unfortunately, I got involved in politics, apartheid, and I was fighting apartheid, and I couldn't return to university. So 2 years later, just shortly after that, a year later, I got married to my beautiful wife, Shanaz, and then 2 years later, I came to Australia. So I came to Australia in 1984, but with a fractured education. My education was in pieces because it was incomplete. But I had enough expertise to get a job. I had a job offer. I started working as a cartographer. And then, of course, I moved back into the computer field and slowly started to build up my education. So apart from just the computer science doctorate, I've also got a diploma in education, but I've also looked over the years, in the last, say, 10 years, I've done a lot of research in medicine itself. I've done a lot of research in paramedical science. I've done a lot of research in nursing. I've done a lot of research in psychology. I'm also a spiritual healer. So from my faith, which springs from my faith, and I've been authorized to heal people from a spiritual perspective. I've been given resources and education to do this. So a lot of people come to me, like for example, 10 years ago, a young couple in Sydney rang me and said to me that their child is suffering from some spiritual ailment. So in our cultures, the spiritual ailment means that your body has been invaded by an outside spirit. And so in some instances, when your body is invaded by an outside spirit, you get into an epileptic fit and you're not yourself.
Okay.
So they asked me to come over. So they asked me, what do you charge? And I said, I charge nothing. If you were here in Perth, I'll do it for free because I have a full-time job, I'm working. I don't need this as a sideline.
It's your way of giving
putting back into the community.
Yeah.
So I said, if you want me to come to Sydney, you pay my ticket, pay my expenses, I'll be there. And I'll stay wherever you want me to stay, and I'll see what I can do for your child. The child was actually 18 months old. So when I got to the home, the family hosted me in their home. I saw the child. I did all my diagnostics to determine whether it was an invading spirit, and it was not. Now, in Islam, we call this invading spirit a jinn. like what you would say, like a genie. So it is a fire being. And these beings basically invade your body and they can take control of your body. So when I looked at the child, I found that this is not a jinn. This has to be something else. And my conclusion at the end, to the dismay of the parents, because they were expecting it to be jinn and that I had the expertise because they'd consulted many people with similar experience to me. And I said, no, this is not a jinn. This is something else. This is an injury. And I asked them if they had taken vaccinations. And at that time, I had no opposition to vaccinations. I myself had been vaccinated for the flu at that time. So while I was doing my medical research, just fast forward a few years, let's say about 3 years, just before the pandemic, I was doing some medical research and I found that in 2009, there was a vaccine called the flu vax, which was administered to young children and infants. And that was withdrawn because it was causing febrile convulsions. Now, febrile convulsions manifest itself as epilepsy.
Wow.
So, when I looked at that, and when I read the research, what was more appalling, Lindsay, is that some of the doctors, and I can show you the research papers, some of the doctors were actually still prescribing the flu vax after it had been withdrawn. So that is amazing.
I mean,
so this is.
I'm processing this. I'm processing this as you're talking, and it's absolutely talk about joining the dots.
Yeah.
Talking about a light bulb moment, I guess, and here we go. With that.
So
journey.
these are the things that probably added to my decision to say that there is something wrong here. We need to investigate. Mm-hmm. And in my culture, if you get some information, you should always verify it. So when we look at information,
well, that would be science as well.
That is science.
That is science.
Absolute science. If you can't question it and you can't verify it, it is not science, and
Correct.
it is not. It is actually scientism, which is actually a different thing. Scientism is more like a cult. And a lot of people who don't believe in God, they say, oh, you can't prove this and can't prove that. But these are the same people who don't believe in God, have no proof of the vaccine. Like they say, there's no proof of God. Where's the proof of the vaccine, of the virus, sorry. So this is the thing, that we need to ask questions. And anybody stops you from asking questions, they are not on the right track. They are not scientific in any way. They are not true people because they want to suppress the truth. Truth can always withstand any questions and any challenges, but lies will always avoid questions and prevent you from asking, because when you ask, you will expose the truth. So I urge all people to ask and question at every point in time. In fact, when I did a little stint as a school teacher, I taught my kids that you must ask questions. And if I can't answer you, then I will come back to you. But I will never tell you to not ask me a question.
That's some great advice, I guess, not only as a school teacher, but as a parent to children.
Exactly.
Going forward. And you've mentioned, I guess, in that story there, you are a man of faith, and without, if you see fit, you've touched on talking about the Quran and Islam. A lot of people say that this is a spiritual war.
It is an attack on religion. And a lot of our Muslim community do not understand this. A lot of our Christian community do not understand this. Now, when you talk about religion, I believe that in the kind of a universality of religion, because all of these three main religions, especially Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are actually Abrahamic faiths. And it was actually Abraham himself that coined the term Muslim. Muslim simply means one who submits to God. And a lot of our Muslims don't understand what is happening today, that truth is the casualty. We are actually in a war, and people don't realize it. Some people said that we're not actually in the beginning of the war, we're actually in the middle of the war. But this war is so different that most people don't realize that we are fighting. And we are fighting not just for our lives, but for our future and for the future of the planet.
So if I put to you, your fight, you're engaging in this fight, of course, principally for you, your family, your
my community, and basically for everybody, because I regard myself as a human being in the first instance.
in the community here in Western Australia. You live, so we're coming to you from Malaga. You live in a location this is not far from you.
Yes, this is
north of the river.
It's north of the river, and it's just very close to a lot of mosques and prayer centres around this area.
And so I guess I'm mindful that I don't want to disclose too much because for fear of vilification, because we've certainly seen, again, this week at the pre-polling booth has been an absolute eye-opener from the observations and that I've seen.
Yes.
And I guess, your angle that you came up and we had the discussion around is, it wasn't to dominate over one particular faith over the other, just to say that all the faiths are actually not really truly understanding. We've seen images of the WA police, for example, going into the Catholic Church, St Bernadette's, checking for mask exemptions in the middle of a service, in the middle. And just extraordinary events that's
an invasion and an encroachment,
irrespective of the faith.
Irrespective of the faith, yes.
And we see, I guess, this particular fight. The other day I had an occasion to put some questions to Dr. Anne Alley, who is running in the electorate of Cowan, for the seat of Cowan. Similarly, I had the same opportunity to put the same questions to Vince Connolly. Yep. And he mentioned recently that himself and Maurice Payne, and if you go onto Vince's page, you'll see his comments there. If I said to you, and I mean no disrespect as a man of Muslim faith, but the term used in the political scene is pork barrelling. They're talking about a tremendous amount of funding to all types of sporting groups, to garner that support. Vince made mention of that himself. I guess in terms of that, the political budget that the major parties have is one of the reasons why you can't, you have to oppose the major parties.
Absolutely, because they can do whatever they want and get the support. But I found in my experience, they will promise you the world and they will not deliver at the end. In fact, when I was putting some of my posters at some of the local businesses, and they explained to me that over the years, political candidates have come up there, including Mark McGowan, and have promised this, that and the other. And later on, when they come back for the second election, or the different election, the following election, they come up and they've forgotten those promises. And he reminded them of those promises. And they said, oh, well, we'll go back and check. So while there might be promises made by Vince or whichever other politician, whether they deliver, if they deliver, it's great. And if they deliver for my community, I'll be absolutely happy that they have delivered. But if they don't deliver, that's another story. So if you say something, you should deliver it.
But I guess the question is, we have to wait 3 years, and within that time to find out. By then, who knows what the landscape's going to happen in 3 years' time. Oof. And I guess to give an example of what you're just saying, and I just want to, because it has been in the news, in terms of mainstream, and a lot of the comments coming through, people don't watch mainstream. And that's fine. I try to keep my finger on the pulse just to see what the narrative is. That's one of the things that we say at Freedom Media, that journalism should not be a government narrative. Journalism at any level, it's an obligation to the citizens to provide both parts, the science of the argument, the debate, whatever the social issue is, so that people can make an informed decision. But where I'm going with this is Dan Andrews sought the support of 3 independents to get a recent bill that he pushed through, and that was when we saw 600,000+ people hitting the streets in never seen before images to oppose that particular bill, and it will come to me in a moment what the bill is.
I was just waiting for you to elucidate.
Yes, it's there, but I can't quite. I don't want to get it wrong. But Dan Andrews, he engaged, and it came down to these three senators,
the independents,
independents, I should say. And now we find with his election campaign in there that he's totally railroaded these independents, and they're fighting for their seats. And I mean, where did it get them? Where did it get them? In relation to that, if that happened to you, if Anthony Albanese came to you, if Scott Morrison came to you and said, Dr. Vagh, we'd like you to take this particular view,
I would absolutely reject it, because I've done this not for position or power. I'm not interested in running Australia or telling Australians what to do. I'm interested in protecting Australian rights. And so therefore anybody who's coming to me to offer me things, I will not accept it. I always take my faith from the Quran, and it was King Solomon who was offered treasures by Queen Bilqis when he was about to take over a throne. And he said, how can you give me something? My Lord has given me enough. So I don't need these things or these offers from any political party. My Lord has given me enough to make me pleased with him.
And I will say just on that, because whether it comes through or those that may watch the stream down the track, we're seeing the comments there. Full disclosure, again, I've pushed for this interview. We had the conversation at the Malaga pre-polling booth. I really liked what you were talking about. I really felt that it's important that people get the opportunity, and I put it to you and said, I would really like to do this, and I think it's important. And of course, I wouldn't say a lot of convincing. I guess this isn't to promote. I'm promoting your message, I guess, is
and
what
I
I'm
thank
doing.
You for that. Yes.
And I'm certainly I'm trying to stay apolitical in this whole thing. But I think Freedom Media WA, we've built up a platform. People, and it's the misinformation, and I see it all the time. And as you've just highlighted there, it's not enough in this instance. All of the messages out there for the Senate position vote above the line, but that won't see a true independent like yourself in. Therefore, this stream is for that reason.
Yes, the main reason is to vote for me and vote below the line. So, if you vote above the line, you won't see me, you'll only see the parties. And if you vote below the line, you will actually see the names of individual candidates. And most people actually don't know how to vote. This is why when you go to a polling station, you find you got all these people sticking pamphlets in your face, and you get even more confused. So basically, to explain, you have the lower house, which is the House of Representatives, and the upper house, which is the Senate. So you'll get two forms, and one form, you can vote at any location, no matter where you live. You can go to any polling booth, and they'll have your location there. So you can actually print whatever electoral division you are in. So that's a green form, and that'll have maybe 8, 9, 10 candidates. And you have to number all of them in order, in sequence. Now, that's done. I'm not on the green form, so you won't see me on the green form. If I was on the green form, I will probably have fallen under the seat of Cowan, but I'm not doing that. I'm going for the Senate. It is much harder to go for the Senate, which means that I've got to get in the order of hundreds of thousands of votes. But this is something that I have to do, because I feel it is important to get a Senate seat rather than a House of Representatives seat. As far as voting below the line is concerned, you will only see myself and all the other independents. And what I found interesting, Lindsay, is that the Australian Electoral Commission have basically said that the draw is unbiased. It is random, but we find that randomly all of the independents have fallen right on the end on the order.
I guess, and again, I'm not trying to prejudice one particular thing, but also in the electorate of Cowan, you have Claire Hand, who's running for a United Australia Party. She streamed the ballot draw, and it's the first time I actually saw what was going on.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yep, she, as a candidate, she was entitled to stream that particular draw, and I guess in looking at that, I just question, number one on the ballot ticket for the House of Representatives is the incumbent Dr. Anne Alley. Number two on the on the House of Representatives is the Greens, and the Greens are preferencing Labor. And I mean, when you look at that and you kind of just think,
the order seems to be contrived.
I mean, a seam is certainly, and I'm certainly by no means saying that it is.
It isn't.
I saw the stream. I tell you what, I mean, if you were a gambling man or a lotto draw or something like that you can hope and pray all you like to come number one, but to have number one and the main party that's preferencing you, Greens, to come number two.
Well, it's an outside chance, isn't it?
It absolutely, mathematically, it
mathematically,
becomes, And then I guess I'm just going to bring up, I guess we are, and I do want to come back and talk about the Senate, but in House of Reps, what we're talking about here, we have Labor, we have Liberal, we have United Australia Party. This is House of Reps for Cowan. But again, the misinformation around here, if you go and start looking at the House of Representatives, and this is the same argument that the good doctor is finding himself in, if you vote above the line, you won't see his name on the Senate ticket, which is the white ticket. If you vote, you need to vote below the line where you see the doctor's name. On these votes here, if you're talking about this, so you're finding, like One Nation, United Australia Party, which is probably the two bigger of the minor parties, as well as Australian Federation Party, they are much lower on the Liberal, and this is covering, so we have here the seat of Burt, the seat of Hasluck on one side, and the seat of Swan and the seat of Changi on the other side. And then we have House of Representatives, we have Burt, Changi and Swan just on here. But you can go through all of these and I'll save you the time, but what you're seeing is that Labor are preferencing Liberal much, much higher above the House of Representatives ballot paper, and certainly well above the likes of One Nation and United Australia Party. So Labor would much rather see them lose to Liberal and maintain the duopoly than see the seat being kept marginal. Keeping a seat marginal, be it House of Representatives or a Senate position, means that politicians don't become career politicians. They work for the people. But that's what we're seeing this election. I've never seen, in my voting history, and I wouldn't say that I know everything, and I don't say that I know much more than most, but I can understand numbers and patterns and things like that, and there is a clear, distinct pattern. With this.
We have to look for the pattern, and the pattern is moving, either Liberal or Labor. So the major parties have got like you said, a duopoly. So you toss a coin. My analogy is, you toss a coin this year and it's Labor, and you toss a coin next election year and it's Liberal, or maybe Labor again. But it's either one of these two, and that's bipartisan politics, not real democracy.
Now, one of the things that we also had a little bit of a discussion around, and it's public record information, the Liberal Party spent the last election, I think you said the number was up around about $382 million.
372 million, not the Liberal Party, but in total for the spending for the election itself. So the parties together spent basically it cost the taxpayer $372 million for the 2019 election. And this year it's expected to cost $500 million. So that's your money. That's taxpayers' money, $500 million. So while you might see all these flashy advertisements and posters and billboards, and you think that they're spending a lot of money, they get it all back. So you're paying for it.
So that, and it is it's a mind-blowing number, and it's certainly, you go down to any of the pre-polling booths, and again, I've mentioned they have teams of people that are paid to be there. You know, Balcatta, for example, is 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Every night, and you're finding people, independents are scrapping to get 1, 2 or 3 call flutes out, and these parties have buses and trucks and trailers and 80 call flutes out, and
we have a definite disadvantage. Personally, myself, I've got no volunteers, I've got no helpers, so I'm doing everything myself. When I met you that day on Monday at Malaga, the following day I made some pamphlets and stood there for 2 hours with my wife. My wife sat in the car, of course, because I didn't want to subject it to the heat. I stood there for 2 hours and I gave the pamphlets, and I realized what a battle I have to face, because there were shifts of volunteers coming in. So you spend an hour, 2 hours from the big parties,
yep.
Yes. And I asked where Claire was, and someone said, oh, she was here for a little while and she's gone. And I thought, yeah. So it looks like it's really a hard battle for me. Yeah. And I hope after this interview, and thanks to Lindsay, maybe I will get some support, maybe I'll get some volunteers. All I need is simply someone to distribute my pamphlets for a couple of hours on end. I don't have a lot of pamphlets. I'm happy that if my pamphlets get distributed, I will only be getting 20 reams of the pamphlets. And that's for the whole Senate, it's not just one seat. If I get rid of all of that, I'll be very happy. I distributed all of that.
So we'll look to pin a comment up there. I guess, can I ask, if people did want to volunteer, how can they get in touch with you to do that?
Well, they can either get in touch with you, Lindsay, and I'm happy for them to go through you.
Sure.
So if they basically come through you and say, look, and you pass the message to me, we could arrange that very easily. Either a pick-up or a drop-off.
We can do that for anybody that's there. So I see a comment right there just saying, oh, okay, so the big parties, they push the how to votes on there. I guess the thing is, in terms of this, the how to vote, at the end of the day, the power vests with the person with the pen or the pencil in the booth at the time. It's only a recommendation. For the Senate position, below the line is quite simple. Number 1.
Yes, quite simple. Number 1, you vote for me. Number 2, I've made a recommendation, but you don't have to follow that recommendation. I've only instituted this recommendation simply because a lot of people have asked me, they have told me, I don't know how to vote, please show me. So when they go there, they don't want to spend too much time. And most of these people are elderly people. They're frail and elderly, and they find it difficult to actually go fill out a large form. A lot of people are encouraged just to fill above the line, and you fill 6 and you walk out, and yes, you've done your duty. You haven't done your duty. You haven't actually scrutinized the candidates and selected them yourself. Voting for a party is not the right way to go. Vote for the person, so you know the person and get to know that person, so you know what representation you're getting in your government, in your democracy. So that's what I've got to say. And
I think we've been talking for a bit, and hopefully you've had an opportunity, and I will come back to you for a final message to put that out. I'd just like to say this, the importance of getting down to help for the likes of Dr. Vaughan, any of the independents, any of the freedom-friendly minor parties. There's a lot of... people are tired. There's a lot of disinformation around. The movement could perhaps be, I would maybe fractured. It's certainly strained, amongst the, and that's as far as I'll expand there. The other day, the AEC, due to COVID, have just announced that they will take telephone voting. So this is what you're talking about here in terms of the volunteers, and this is why, if you're at home and you're watching this stream, to say that you're going to vote the majors last is only one part of the puzzle. What needs to be done is people need to get down behind the independents and help them with this. If handing brochures out is one big step forward or a step forward,
Yes.
it's scrutineering that is the next challenge.
Absolutely. I
Because-
forgot to mention that, yes.
Because you have 43 booths that you need to try and cover.
To ensure that the process is fair and equitable, yes.
So on top of that, you also have the AEC right now are going through postal votes. They're not collating the votes, they're only counting the number of postal votes that are coming in. But still, there's an opportunity for scrutineers to get there to ensure that the count is right, that the numbers coming in and when they go out to be dumped on the table are correct, without the independent checks there from the scrutineers representing the likes of yourself, independent Senate candidates. Those checks and balances are simply not there. But now you throw in the mix the telephone voting, and you can get a scrutineer into town and the scrutineer can listen to the phone call. The registration process, I mean, I've got to be honest, I try to sort of see things through. I tend to not give up easily, but I started reading the ins and outs of all of that, and I ended up closing my laptop in disgust, just thinking, my goodness.
It's too difficult.
It's, how do they ensure the registration process doesn't enable duplicate votes?
And that is a worry because, I mean, look, we have so much of technology now. Why haven't we had this whole process digitalized? The whole electoral process digitalized with all the checks and balances in? We have to ask that question because now we're spending so much money on all of this army. I think it's 130,000 people who are employed by the AEC for this duration of the elections. And so that's a huge number. And so if we actually spent that money, and we have the technology, we've seen this technology being used, that we could use everything digital, and there's no need, and there'll be lots of checks and balances to prevent any type of fraud or any type of mishap.
And there's a comment coming through there saying video everything you can. So I can tell you the process as best I've been able to establish this. Scrutineers, if there's more than one, they once you're on the floor, you can't take your mobile phone on the floor. It's simply the scrutineer. And I'll give you an example. An example may be that a person marks, and I guess with your cartography experience, and those in Europe have different ways of writing the numeral 1 as opposed to the numeral 7. And it simply could be, in your case, the numeral 1 is interpreted as a 7.
That's a common fault, isn't it? Especially if we were used to writing in the Eastern scripts, like the Arabic script, it starts from right to left. So the mark of the 1 might look right, but is actually wrong and look like a 7. But so we need to ensure that this is not taking place.
And I guess, in my previous education as well with cartography, we would the European manner. We would put a tail through the middle of the 7.
To ensure that that's a 7.
To ensure it's a 7. Let's solve this now. I mean, let's, if we could push out, if we could offer some advice, is a straight up and down 1.
It's a straight up and down 1 it's much safer because we know it's a 1. But if you put the base and the tail, you can have a problem because
on the numeral 1.
On the numeral 1,
yep.
You can actually be interpreted as a 7 because, as you know, some people might put the head of the 1 more horizontal than angle downwards. So if you angle downwards, there might not be so much of an issue. But if you place it horizontally, it actually looks like a 7. And especially if you don't put the tag across the middle to ensure that it's a 7. So it's best, is a recommendation only, just to put a straight line to show that it is 1.
Straight line for 1, a 7 with the tail through the middle of the 7 to
indicate it's 7. Yes.
And these are the type of things that scrutineers are needed at the time to make that line call. Without the representation, you'll have the major parties who will have teams of scrutineers there to do that. So very, very important thing. Throw in telephone voting now. I guess the mind boggles really. Just a comment I just want to pick up there, and certainly. Joanne, I'll come back to your comment there, if we may. So there is a question that's come on. And we have touched on digital identification, Joanne, and I will get the doctor to go back and speak about that, Dr. Vaughan. So there was a comment there just coming forward, and certainly by no means, we're not singling out this person, but they're saying here that they're voting for the Greens for climate change, social housing, free education, the likes of that. On the Green ticket. Either ticket, House of Reps or Senate, a vote for the Green is essentially a vote for Labor. And I'm just wanting to, I guess, put forward a concept that the Labor government has come out and they're wanting to take a shared equity, 40% in people's, to get the people into the home loans. So 2% deposit, 40% equity in that, with some very strict criteria around all of that. So in terms of social housing, yes, it's needed. Because the social housing, not everybody will be in a position to be able to buy their home. Yeah. But having a roof over one's head is one of the most
critical. Yeah.
Absolutely critical. What would you say to that person that said, I'm voting Greens, they're not voting One Nation? You had 30 seconds to say for the Senate, vote for Dr. Vaughan on those issues?
On the issue of housing. And climate change. Well, on the issue of housing, I mean, look, the Greens, if they're offering the support for the housing, as you said,
I guess indirectly, because the Greens, if they don't take the seat, the primary vote, they're preferencing Labor. So you would have to say that cumulatively, the Green votes most likely will go to Labor. And that will, with the Labor primary vote and the Greens, that will see
them prevail. Yeah.
Yes, it will prevail.
Yeah. So I mean, if they're giving you that socialist angle of getting housing, and it's important, especially for our young people, to get into the housing market rather than into the rental market, and if they got shared equity, that's a good policy. But as you said, what is the price of that policy in the end of it all? So we have to look further than just the immediate benefit. We have to look at the long-term benefits. And so the long-term benefits are, we've seen that in shared equity situations, there might be problems down the line.
And shared equities, one of the criteria around that is you would essentially be capping yourself to an employment salary. You will never be able to breach without overreach from the government coming in, the Labor, because it's Labor's policy. $90,001 may, and the clause is in there. So if the clause is in there, you'd have to ask yourself, would it be used or could it be used? So, and I would say the question is yes, because why would the clause be there? So $90,001, and then Labor could come in and force you to sell their home and recover the debt equity share. So
it's not a question of if, it's a question of when with that clause.
And that's I wasn't going to go there and say that, but I will. Let's let's not sugarcoat it. That and that's essentially why that would be in place.
And so people need to consider that. It's not just they're helping us, but we have to look at the long-term effects of those clauses. And invariably, some people will fall short of those clauses, and then they own nothing, and they're back to square one or less than square one.
Yeah, because the cost going in and out on that, on 2% deposit, again, for those that are really trying to get in there with rising interest rates going in, the cost of getting into the home, those fees alone would be put into the mortgage, and that becomes part of the package to get out of that. Interest rates will go up. It's likely house home equity values will drop, and people may find themselves in 2-3 years' time with a negative mortgage.
Negative equity, yeah.
Negative equity, yeah. Which I guess that's my understanding of that. Again, not having a crack there, but that's one thing that I can see is a little bit fraught with that. And I just want to come back to Joanne's question about the digital identity. But before I do, I want to just talk about the importance of, because this has just triggered this, the importance of having a provision in legislation and why would it be there. And for me personally, I looked some time ago, I looked at, the importance of superannuation, and I looked at things. We've had this red tape, we've had this, federal and state governments doing away with bureaucracy, as they call it, and red tape. One of the provisions that's in legislation dating back to 1906, which was the main trigger for me personally to look at a self-managed super fund, because the government dispensed with a whole heap of legislation, but they kept in a provision that allows them in a deep recession to take 25% of people's superannuation. And if you want to see what that looks like, you only need to go back and have a look at Greece, where they capped people. It was €60 a day from your bank accounts. Then they increased it to hundreds, but people were lining the streets for days to get money out of their accounts.
And that's the proof of concept.
There we go.
Yeah.
So that, So that's what we're talking about. Joanne's question: digital identity. Where do you stand on that?
Well, digital identity looks good from the outset because, of course, it facilitates a lot of things. But we have to look at what's happening to us as humans and the imposition on our freedoms as humans. So, for example, even with the proof of concept with the banking, that when you take out, say, $5,000 or $10,000 from the bank, they will immediately trigger an alert to say that your banking account has been suspended. So while you might have a digital identity and everything goes digital, they can control you so much more and restrict you so much more. So you do something that they do not approve of, like taking out your own money from the bank, they could actually suspend or close your account. And we've seen it, I think it was some of the Freedom Group members that had a Westpac bank, Westpac bank accounts closed or suspended simply because, who knows why. Maybe they basically did something that the bank did not like. So the digital identity is good in that you could have maybe a universal digital identity, but what's going to happen in the future? That's what we need to think about. Where does it go? Where is this all leading to? And in my opinion, it's leading to the social credit system and the total digitalization and what we call the technocracy, where everything is controlled digitally. Even the smart cities are basically already in main production, where people will start to live in smart cities. And we've seen already the move or the push to move people away from the regional and the country areas into the urban areas because they have more control of you, because you have a solid digital identity. And already they've introduced something called the Digital Passport Declaration, where if you're coming into Australia, you must fill out the Digital Passport Declaration. At the moment, it doesn't seem to be binding in the sense that they're going to check, because there are strict punishments for not filling out a digital identity. What will I say? Digital public declaration.
The digital passport application, I think they talk about, or the digital passport identity. And I guess some of that we touched on. We did a stream at the Holiday Inn with Claire, who came in and was facing deportation. In her case, she actually put that forward, and she had everything there. The only thing is that she hadn't updated her COVID test, her PCR test, on the digital passport declaration, because when she arrived in Australia, the federal government, the Department of Home Affairs, dispensed with that requirement. So I guess...
Yes, exactly. So when they dispensed with it, we didn't know what happened with it after that.
She applied common sense. Arriving in Australia, I left England on the 17th, arrived in Australia on the 18th. It's no longer a requirement. They looked at that and said, after many interviews interrogating her, you're going to be deported straight up. So that was a stream that we did about 2 weeks ago with Claire and her family, Michael, who reached out, and luckily, I guess the government had seen common sense there, and she now has her visa and she's able to visit.
Oh, that's fantastic! To know.
Visit her grandma. So that's her grandchildren. That's where we're going there. So I guess, Joanne's saying, she's saying it seems that you oppose digital identity, therefore she's not sure how you can call for digital voting.
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, we have to look at the benefits and the risks in everything. So there are benefits and risks to digital identity, and there are benefits and risks to digital voting. So if each person can make their own call and decide, look, digital voting is good for me, and what you call the digital passport isn't. So there might be differences in the issue, which actually the only common thing is it's digital. But there might be different calls or different assessments of benefits and risks for digital voting, and different assessments and risks for the actual digital passport. So I hope I've answered that.
Well, I mean, hopefully you've answered Joanne's questions. If she has any more, I'm sure she'll pop another comment up there. I just want to touch, digital identity. I was about to wind it up, but there's so much more. I mean, we could talk
for ages.
We could. And just recently, you mentioned the social credit system, and just you'll only now see a different form. They've been running for about 2 years during the daytime talk shows, and I quite often, when I'm editing, I'll have the TV going to hear the press conferences, and I hear the ads, and buy the steak knives and the makeup and this and that and the other. But they're constantly pushing, the credit scores, and now I've seen in the last couple of days a new ad that's talking about you can apply for your credit rating check free if you subscribe to this credit score system. And we've also seen about 3.5 weeks ago, there was a lot of mainstream media headlines, stories, propaganda is probably what I would say, saying that people may be entitled to quite a few hundreds of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars for Medicare rebates. In order to check if you're qualified, you had to go onto MyGov. In order to go onto the MyGov website, you had to provide your digital passport app and your passport. You had to fill in this particular process to then go and do all of that. So you're opting in to the system, and then may find that
you might fail on just one little item, and the whole system collapses for you.
Well, but you're already in the system at this point.
Yeah. So they can suspend you, or they could do something to you because you've not filled out this one little bit.
And a thing that I've done, and I've plenty of rallies, I've spoken to young fellas who sort of don't really know, and we're all impressionable teenagers at once, and
absolutely.
I sort of say, where it's going, I wish we could. These young guys, and I remember distinctly having a conversation with one young fellow, and I just sort of said to him, what sort of car do you drive? He told me, and he's, putting all his money, he's working hard, and he's, building up this car, and he loves chucking the odd burnout here and there and everything like that. And, the whole digital passport thing, the little green tick going to a red cross, and just making him aware that with this particular system here, that you go and chuck a burnout, you get apprehended by the police, all of a sudden your rights as a citizen is where you can go, what you can do, how much you can spend at a shop, your little green tick goes to a red cross. Boom.
You lock down. You effectively lock down as a human being.
Yeah. So that is.
But there are so many other technologies out there. Like if you look in terms of DNA technology, they're able to store information in DNA itself. So while we might think that technology is not that advanced to have this absolute control on humans, it is. You just need to look at some of the like CRISPR technology and the DREADS technology, where they basically identified specific genes that even control the way you think or the way you feel or the way you incline to, say, for example, to believe in God. so they can change that if they got you completely as a, the digital identity is only the beginning. Your digital, constitution is the main thing, because you will have your DNA manipulated. They're saying it's in the guise of basically health issues, that they can fix this issue and they can fix that issue. But over the last, say, 50 years, we've seen what medical science is doing. That once you basically have a sickness, you have that sickness for life. You're chronically ill. You're not getting any better. And why is that? We should ask these questions. Why is that? I mean, if we've got this technology, let's use it for the good of humankind, rather than simply just making people earn profits by keeping you sick all the time and only treating the symptoms. Medical science needs to actually treat the cause and remove the cause. But nobody makes profit if you have a sickness and I cure you. The profit ends there.
True, and I guess that comes back to, as you mentioned, the spiritual healing. Another aspect. Big pharma certainly doesn't profit.
We have hardly any natural foods left. You go to the supermarket, everything has got codes, and nobody knows what those codes are. So unless you look at the codes, and talking about codes, a lot of the rat tests have got a code called E229E. What is 229E? It's the equivalent of the code. So what did you test yourself for using the rat test?
So, well, there you go. So I'll just get you to say that again, because I'm sure some.
The code for the cold is E229E.
229E.
Yeah, so when you do the rat test, it's checking for 229E. And of course, we all had the cold and we all had the flu just a few weeks ago. But it was the flu and the cold. It wasn't anything to do with a disease called COVID.
So I guess let's go with. And
I know we didn't want to touch too much on.
No, you're taking, you're running for a Senate position here in Western Australia. Non-politician, but a man that can see many things, an analytical mind. So let's go with a non-political answer. Digital identity, yes or no?
It's a very difficult thing to answer, as I said, because I am, I'm an advocate of technology, but I'm also not an advocate of the control that technology can bring. So yes, digital identity is good in some respects, but we need to evaluate the risks that are associated with that. So and there are many.
You'd like to see full disclosure,
full transparency
on what it's doing,
and what the ramifications are.
Yep.
Where and when will it start to impinge on our freedoms?
If I said to you the ability for one to decide to opt in or opt out?
Yes, I would prefer that system would be a better option. I think we had that with the MyGov medical thing.
Or the My Health Record.
My Health Record, yes. We had that, you opt in or opt out, and people basically, you had to opt out. They had the opt-out option.
The default position was you're in the system,
and you had to opt out. So I think we should actually have the opt-in system. You need to decide that you want to be part of that system.
So the default position should be you're opted out until you decide to opt in.
Exactly. That is a position of choice, and it actually encompasses informed decision, like with everything else.
Yep.
So freedom of choice and informed decision. We are humans of the 21st century, so we should be able to make our own decisions and not have them made for us.
And I see Joanne's saying that she certainly, subscribes to some of the comments she's saying there. The default position being opted in. Hopefully, Joanne, you might have just picked up on what we said. The standard position, really, what you'd like to see is everybody's opted out, and you decide whether to opt in.
Everything you decide.
Yeah.
The decision is ultimately with the individual that's going to face the consequences.
So now I want to come back. And again, I mean, opting out. I guess as a man with a computer science background, if we look at that particular thing as well, the government spent a tremendous amount of money getting that MyGov system up and running, and said it was absolutely cyber-proof, and it wasn't. The rollout was pushed back by 6 months because at the closing date it came under a cyber attack, and people's data was there was data harvesting, and I think the person, I'm just trying to think of his name now, but it'll come to me again. He fell on his sword, I guess, for the government for the rollout of the My Health Record. But Suzanne has made a couple of comments. She hasn't had to do that for her passport and things like that. You look at apprenticeship schemes. Apprenticeship schemes, if an employer, a small business, wants to engage a new apprentice, there's currently $15,000 support to the small business owner. But that small business owner has to go through a digital identity registration process.
There you have it. It's just the carrot before the donkey again. So they give you a carrot and then they lock you into the system. So you've locked into the system. Invariably, a lot of people already have got MyGov IDs. I know I have. A lot of people have the health record. I've actually opted out for that health record. So it's an individual choice. So you could have one, but you could not have the other.
Yep. Yeah, and I guess at certain particular parts you may be involved with the ATO or the Medicare or the family services or anything else.
Invariably with the MyGov, if you want to fill out your tax return, you're pushed into the MyGov situation where it's much easier for you to fill out your tax return if you've got a MyGov identity. And it's a matter of seconds you could finish, depending on an individual situation, you can finish your tax return in a matter of seconds without paying a tax agent. So, as I said, there's always benefits to the system and there's risks. So look at the benefits, evaluate them, and look at the risks and evaluate them as well. Then make a decision based on that.
And I'm seeing a comment just coming through now saying that businesses don't go through that, they're actually threatening fines of $10,000. I mean, it's uncorroborated. I've got no reason, from what I see, if I had to say that comment is plausible. We've seen many things, many things like that. Skylink is a digital system. I'm not really sure what Skylink's about, but I certainly will be looking into that. So we've been going for a while now. If there's any other questions, yes, no answers, I guess, or just give a couple of moments for some people to send them through. One last, in the meantime, again, what would you like to say? Is it too late? And if those that have watched or may go and watch in the next couple of days this stream, why would they give you...
Well, I know it's for some people it is actually too late because this is the first time they're seeing me as an independent candidate. A lot of people asked me about a video. Where's your video? Where's your profile? Well, Lindsay has helped me to get this out there, and I'm thankful for that. I guess my closing statement would be is that it's never too late. You now know my profile, you know what I stand for. I am advocating to vote independent all the way. So even if people ask me for a recommendation, which I have here, the recommendation is mostly for the independents. And then, of course, for the other minor parties, because I'm maintaining the stance that put the majors last and give the minor parties a chance, but put the independents first. So not just myself, but if you don't prefer me, select one of the other independent candidates.
But vote below the line.
Vote below is absolutely mandatory. Yep. I wouldn't like to use that word mandatory. I realize that's the wrong word. It's actually imperative to use to vote below the line.
So Sue, thank you very much. She's saying thanks for this informative video, I guess, the discussion. Sue, thank you very much for your comments as well. By no means we're looking to single out people. You've put a point of view across. It's great that we can actually have these discussions. I think it's really good. And we've tried to make it a little bit more interactive. We can see your comments here. That's why we're looking down here now just to have a look and see. Okay, so what is his name and his state? So obviously, because I'm West Australian, we're in Western Australia. Dr. Vagh, you live in WA, you live in the northern suburbs. Your name?
My name is Dr. Yunous Vagh. So as we've discussed earlier, I've got a PhD in computer science, but I've also got a medical background. So just remember that, Dr. Yunous Vagh. But on the form, you'll find my name as Vagh Yunous.
So I'm just going to go by comments coming through, and if I may just grab, okay, so here we go, and I'll just, Karen's just moving around now. To please recap from what Janet is saying, Dr. Yunous Vagh, you just heard him say that his party, he is running as an independent in the Senate. And what we're showing here is if you look on the white ballot paper for the Senate above the line, and I'll just wait for the camera to catch up, you won't find the good doctor's name. It just simply is not there, and that is why we've said from the outset to look at. In fact, all the independents are. Whoops, I'll go this side. Here are labelled as ungrouped.
And that's why I feel that that's not a fair playing ground, because of the fact that we are not represented above the line. So how can we call that a fair playing ground? You should rather have a white ballot form with everybody, no option to vote below or above the line, but everybody as individuals. And the reason that some of the people have come up with to say it's easier for the voter. Why make it easier for the voter? The voter is tasked with a very important task. Important responsibility to choose your candidate, because it's going to last for the next 3 years, and that decision could be, you don't want to regret that decision. So make sure that you spend an extra minute. All it takes is an extra minute to look at each candidate and put your mark against each individual candidate.
Well, and speak to the candidate as we did. Yeah. We had a conversation down at the pre-polling booth. And again, for those that may have joined, that's how this started. I liked, what you had to say, and I certainly felt it's very important to get there. Give an opportunity to get this out. Just a comment that's going past at Anne-Marie saying that not all independents are truly independents, and we found again, shadow independents. There's a lot of talk around the teal independents, things like that, climate 200. You're even looking here in Western Australia, other, although not independents, I think running for the House of Representatives, Kate Cheney, who's a tremendous amount of, actually I think she's, no, let me just think.
There is one, another independent, I can't remember his name, for the House of Representatives.
For the House of Representatives, so certainly none in the division or the electorate that you live in for the House of Reps, but we're talking about the Senate. But even an independent like Kate Cheney, as I certainly understand, she has the backing of the Homes of Court. The family,
the previous Premier.
The tremendous amount of money that they're putting in behind campaigning. So there we go. I think we've pretty much put out as much as we can. Thank you, Nadia, for your comment there. We're simply not trying to expose, this, but it's certainly, she's saying there, thanks for exposing how deceptive this is. It's certainly been eye-opening for myself. I think the biggest thing for me is the telephone voting due to COVID. How convenient. And
always
the only way around.
Back on.
Absolutely. The only way to ensure that this is kept fair is you need people to act as scrutineers. If there's one role that would be the most important role,
it would be the scrutineers.
It's the scrutineers. So, Dr. Vagh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lindsay, for giving me this opportunity.
No, it's been our pleasure, and hopefully you've got a little bit out of this. We encourage you to keep the comments going, and we'll certainly look. This week we'll be trying to get around again to as many locations as we can. We certainly will be. Where will we see you this week?
Probably in Cowan, in Malaga, in the early polling, in the pre-poll. But I would probably be in the on election day. I'll probably be in my area, which is in St Andrews.
St Andrews.
Yeah.
Okay, so there we go, and it certainly has been a great discussion. The inaugural stream from the studio, I guess, and it was something that I really couldn't wait to have this conversation, because I won't get this finished in time for the election, unfortunately, but nonetheless. So we're hopefully, as I say, keep the comments going. Anybody that may be able to offer some time, then please put the message there, and we will ensure. We've got Rebecca that's sitting behind there. She will be picking up the messages, no doubt, and she'll help reconnect people through that may want to, for a truly independent person,